My name is Carol Camerata. I'm 36, and I'm writing this from a hotel room that smells like lemon disinfectant, old wallpaper glue, and the faint trace of someone else's cigarettes. It's 3:07 a.m. now. I keep glancing at the glowing digital clock on the nightstand like it might suddenly reveal a different reality. One where the last 6 hours didn't happen, where my life didn't tilt on its axis, where I wasn't sitting here with clothes I didn't pack, and a heart that feels metallic, scraped out, and hollow. But this is the world I have now, and this is how my story begins. I had been married to my husband, 34, for 7 years. We weren't perfect, but I thought we were steady, predictable in a way that felt safe rather than stale. We had recently bought a fixer-upper, a 2-story house with peeling yellow paint and a sagging porch, but a skyline view that made strangers stop on the sidewalk. We spent 8 months pouring every ounce of our savings into making it livable. Classic millennial dream. Buy the worst house on the best street, renovate, build equity, build a future. My husband loved the idea of design vision. I loved spreadsheets that kept us from financial ruin. Somehow, the two of us met in the middle. 3 months ago, we hired a general contractor, a woman named Taryn, to manage the kitchen overhaul and the master bath addition. She was in the house nearly every day, wearing paint-splattered jeans, steel-toe boots, and that casual confidence that made my husband laugh a little harder than necessary whenever she joked about renovation disasters. She petted our dog, complimented my coffee, remembered. I liked extra whipped cream on hot chocolate, tiny friendliness that at the time I attributed to her wanting good client referrals. I didn't know it was my first warning sign. Yesterday, technically, the day before, since we're long past midnight now, my afternoon meeting got canceled. A supply chain disaster spiraled out of nowhere, my client pushed everything back, and suddenly I had free hours I didn't expect. I considered texting my husband, but the idea of surprising him with an early dinner felt sweet. In a way we hadn't indulged in for a while. I imagined him in our half-renovated living room, surrounded by sawdust and plastic sheeting, and maybe we'd step out for sushi or burgers. Something spontaneous. Something that reminded us we were still a couple beneath all the construction dust. So at 2:15 p.m., I pulled into the driveway. Taryn's truck was already there, nothing unusual, though she usually stayed until 4. I remember thinking I should have grabbed pastries or something for them. When I unlocked the front door, I did it quietly, not because I suspected anything, but because the remodel meant unexpected noises could be dangerous. I didn't want to walk in on a power saw mid-cut, but the house wasn't noisy. It was silent in a way that immediately felt wrong. Then I heard a sound soft at first, then unmistakable, a laugh. My husband's laugh. He only used that laugh after a couple of drinks or when he was trying too hard to impress someone. Something about the rhythm of it made my stomach fold into itself. A woman murmured something in response. Her voice was low, confident, and intimate. Taryn. I stood completely still, holding the doorknob like it might anchor me to the version of my life I thought I had. Then the words drifted out, careless, amused, edged with secrecy. You really think she hasn't noticed? My husband's voice was light teasing. She's obsessed with the budget, Taryn whispered back. She doesn't pay attention to anything else. Besides, she thinks I'm working on the plumbing right now. Taryn laughed softly. I am working on plumbing. A beat. Just not the kind she thinks. It felt like someone slid a metal rod through my spine. My first instinct wasn't to burst through the doorway or scream. It wasn't to run or cry. It was clarity cold, abrupt, and terrifying in how calm it made me. I realized that if I mishandled this even by a breath, the narrative could spiral into something he said versus she said. I could be painted as hysterical, irrational, emotional. I could lose the upper hand before I even knew the full shape of the betrayal. Instead, I stepped backward out onto the porch, closing the door quietly behind me. I sat in my car, staring at my phone, strangely steady. My hands weren't shaking. My heartbeat wasn't racing. It felt like I was watching a movie about someone who happened to have my same haircut and wedding band. I scrolled to my lawyer's contact, a college friend who'd once told me he thrived on conflict and courtroom battles the way athletes thrived on adrenaline. He answered on the second ring. Carol. Everything okay? You sound compressed. My husband, I said. He's inside with Taryn. I heard them talking. They're having an affair. My voice didn't crack. I didn't recognize it. His tone dropped instantly into professional mode. Where are you? In the house. No, outside. Do not confront them. Do not yell. Do not touch anything. Do you have a key? Yes. Good. Go inside quietly. If they're in a compromising position, take photos or videos. Don't speak to them. Don't argue. Don't accuse. Once you have evidence, leave immediately and drive straight to my office. I'm drafting the separation paperwork now. I hung up, inhaled until my lungs hurt, and walked back toward the door. The hallway was dim, lit only by the slanted afternoon sunlight slipping through plastic sheeting. I stepped through it, careful, silent. Voices grew louder, soft laughter, the rustle of fabric, a clink of chopsticks on a dish. Through a narrow tear in the plastic divider, I saw them. Not tangled on the couch, not caught in an obvious act. What I saw was somehow worse. They were sitting close together on the new beige sectional, my expensive, impractical purchase. Sharing takeout sushi like it was a date night. Her legs were tucked under her. His hand rested lightly on her knee. She leaned into him as he fed her a piece of tuna roll. It was domestic, comfortable, like they'd been this way for weeks. Like I was the outsider in my own home. I lifted my phone and pressed record. When I stepped through the plastic, it crinkled loudly enough to make them both jerk upright. Taryn's foot knocked over a cup of soy sauce, leaving a dark stain spreading across the rug we bought on sale but loved anyway. My husband went pale. Carol, you're home early. I didn't speak. I pointed the camera at him, then at her, then at the spilled sushi and their intertwined legs. 5 silent seconds. Taryn stood abruptly, her shirt half untucked. What are you doing? You can't just... I took a photo of her, my expression unreadable. My husband's voice cracked. Carol, please wait, we can talk. But I was already turning away. He followed me through the doorway, his voice becoming frantic. This isn't what it looks like. It was just lunch. I kept walking, down the steps, into the car, locked the door. He stood in the doorway, helpless, shocked, almost small. I didn't look back. I drove straight to my lawyer's office, signed everything he put in front of me, and by the time the sun set, the separation petition was filed. My husband didn't even know yet. All he knew was that I left. Now here I am, staring at peeling hotel curtains, realizing my life didn't just break it, split cleanly, surgically, like someone cut it open with a blade. Tomorrow I have to return to the house with a police escort to gather my belongings. Wish me strength. 5 days. It's astonishing how quickly time can dissolve when your life is collapsing in slow motion. By the morning of the police escort, the adrenaline that had carried me through the first 24 hours had burned out completely, leaving something quieter, heavier, and more hollow than shock detachment. Pure, icy detachment. I needed it. If I let emotion seep in, I would crack open like old plaster. The officers were polite, but distant, the kind of neutrality you expect from people who have seen the entire spectrum of domestic disasters. They called it a civil standby. We're here to keep everyone calm, one of them said, hands resting lightly on his belt. Translation. We're not therapists. We're bodyguards for the truth. When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed something instantly. Taryn's truck was parked in the exact same place as the day I left. Not slightly shifted, not missing, not even angled differently. She had not gone home, or maybe she hadn't had a home to return to. The idea flashed through my mind, and I pushed it away. It didn't matter anymore. The officers walked ahead of me as I unlocked the door. They stepped inside first. My husband was in what used to be our kitchen, though. Kitchen felt generous now that most of it was gutted. He was wearing my robe tied loosely at the waist like he owned the place and the person who used to fill that robe. Taryn leaned against the half-finished counter beside him, sipping from one of my ceramic mugs. You can't be here, my husband said, pointing accusingly, like he was the wrong party. I told you I don't feel safe with you. One of the officers stepped forward before I could reply. Sir, this is Ms. Camerata's legal residence. She has the right to enter and retrieve her property. Step aside. My husband immediately shifted his expression into something wounded, eyes wide, shoulders hunched, voice trembling on cue. He had always been a good actor when he wanted sympathy. Officer, he said, turning to the female cop, she abandoned me. She left without money, without explanation, and now she brings police to intimidate me. I ignored him completely and walked past them into the bedroom. The silence between the officers and the two of them felt thick like mud. I didn't want to stand there and listen to the script he always used when he needed to dodge accountability. When I reached the bedroom, I pulled out my suitcase, systematically folding my clothes, grabbing documents, my laptop, my passport, my birth certificate. Every item I touched felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to the version of me who used to care about grocery lists and laundry schedules. When I finally returned to the living room, Taryn was speaking to the male officer. Technically, she said with an air of authority she hadn't earned, I'm a tenant. I've been staying here to finish the renovations faster, so legally I have residency. She can't kick me out. I froze. A tenant? I asked, my voice flat. Taryn lifted her chin. Verbal agreement. Your husband and I agreed. That's valid in this state. The officer sighed deeply, like he hated that she wasn't completely wrong. Ma'am, he said to me with regret, if she can prove she established residency, eviction would have to be handled through civil court. It's not something we can enforce today. I looked from Taryn to my husband. Neither would meet my eyes. They were partners now, not only in betrayal, but in legal maneuvering. It was almost impressive how fast they had aligned. Fine, I said. Enjoy the house. The furnace is dying and the roof leaks. Hope your tenant agreement covers that. My husband's face tightened, but he didn't respond. I walked out. The officers followed. My life fit into one suitcase and a small safe box that held everything valuable enough to rescue from the wreckage. But the worst part was still ahead. That afternoon, I logged into our joint bank account, the one we use for the mortgage utilities and all the renovation expenses. The balance hit me like a slap, zeros and dollars. Every last cent, $12,000, had been transferred into my husband's personal account. No warning, no discussion. Just gone. Before the shock settled, my email pinged. It was an invoice from Taryn's company, although company was an exaggeration, since it was just her and an aging truck. The invoice listed emergency plumbing, structural reinforcement, expedited work totaling $8,500 for work I knew she hadn't done. I called my lawyer immediately. Can they do this? I asked, pacing my tiny rental apartment, the walls too close and too beige. The money transfer looks bad for him, he said. It's not illegal before formal filing, but it's definitely ammunition. The invoice, if the work wasn't completed, that's fraud. And since they're involved romantically, it's likely collusion. What now? Now, he said evenly, we freeze everything. You stop contributing to the mortgage, stop paying utilities. If you fund anything now, you're subsidizing them. We'll file an emergency motion for sale of the marital home. I hesitated. If I stop paying the mortgage, my credit is going to take a hit. He sighed. Carol, you are not paying for your husband and his lover to live comfortably in the house you bought. Sometimes you lose points on your credit score to gain your life back. That line settled something inside me. When the utilities cutoff took effect, I sent a single text to my husband, the first communication since the day I walked out. Utilities are now in your name. Mortgage is your responsibility since you have exclusive use of the property. Lawyer says hi. 3 minutes later, he replied, Husband, you are a monster. The fridge is off. All the food is spoiling. How am I supposed to live? I typed, Ask your tenant. Maybe she can fix it. His typing bubble exploded into nothing. Then came the flood. His mother called, screaming so loudly she didn't notice her phone cut out twice. You promised to care for him, so he made a mistake. You don't get to throw away a marriage because of one little betrayal. His father sent a text accusing me of being vindictive. His sister left a voicemail claiming I had abandoned him during a mental health crisis. None of them mentioned that he drained the bank account, or moved in his lover, or lied for months. Then the mutual friends split. Some sent me quiet texts of support. Others sent self-righteous messages implying I was cruel. You didn't have to cut the power, one friend lectured. I didn't cut the power, I said aloud to no one. I took my name off the bill. He had the money. He just didn't want to spend it on anything that wasn't Taryn. For the first time since discovering the affair, I felt something other than numbness. I felt resolve. Because now it wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. They thought they were clever. They had no idea who they were dealing with. By the third week, the shock had transformed into something sharper and far more dangerous clarity. Not the cool, detached kind that carried me through the hotel night breakdown, but a molten clarity anger forged into purpose. Because the more pieces my lawyer and I uncovered, the more obvious it became that my husband's betrayal hadn't been a moment of weakness. It was a strategy, a slow, methodical siphoning of our marriage, our finances, and our future. My lawyer put me in touch with a forensic accountant, a quiet, almost monk-like man, whose office looked like it had been assembled by a robot obsessed with symmetry. He introduced himself as the numbers guy, which I assumed was a joke until I realized he meant it. He handled spreadsheets like surgeons handled scalpels. Minimal words, maximum precision. Over the next 10 days, he peeled back the renovation invoices layer by layer. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, he finally called. "You need to come in." When I arrived, he had a single folder sitting in the middle of the table like a crime scene exhibit. "Walk me through it," I said. He opened the folder with a small, deliberate motion. "Your renovation invoices for the last 3 months show high-end materials: Italian marble, custom cabinets, premium fixtures. I cross-checked them with supplier records." He paused. "None of the materials were ordered." I felt my jaw tighten. "So where did the money go?" He turned the page, revealing a spreadsheet so color-coded it almost looked artistic. "Here's the pattern. Every time your husband approved a large payment to Taryn's company, a matching payment went from her personal account to pay down your husband's credit card bill. Or she bought things for him. He laundered marital funds through her invoices." Laundered. That word hit me harder than affair ever did. The accountant continued. "They weren't just cheating on you. They were using your own money to finance the relationship. Restaurants, hotel stays, gas for her truck, 2 payments on his phone, even a pair of concert tickets. The betrayal was no longer emotional, it was financial, calculated, coordinated." I sat back, breath measured but tight. "So this isn't just divorce." "No," he said calmly. "This is fraud, collusion, civil conspiracy." My lawyer was practically vibrating when he read the report. "We're filing a fraud claim, a breach of contract claim against Taryn, and a dissipation of assets claim against your husband. With this evidence, we can argue that the house sale proceeds go entirely to you." And so we filed the motions. 3 days later, I found myself standing outside a courtroom, watching my husband walk in with the saddest Victorian orphan expression he could manufacture. He wore clothes I hadn't seen in years, wrinkled, outdated, intentionally too big. He'd stripped himself of dignity on purpose to appear sympathetic. Taryn wasn't with him. Convenient. His lawyer, a woman I was certain he paid with the stolen $12,000, stood beside him, flipping papers dramatically as though the performance might sway the judge before anything was said. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Her expression alone told me she had zero tolerance for theatrics. My husband's lawyer began with a melodramatic flourish. "Your Honor, my client has been abandoned." Mrs. Camerata left him without warning or support. She cut water and has left him in severe financial hardship. We request temporary spousal support, $2,000 a month, and for her to resume paying the mortgage until the divorce is finalized. The judge tilted her head slightly. "Is the respondent currently living alone?" My husband swallowed. "Well, no, not always. For safety reasons, My lawyer cut in smoothly, handing the judge the forensic report, the bank statements, and the photos I'd taken. "Your Honor, the petitioner is currently cohabitating with the individual named in the fraud investigation. We have documented evidence of collusion, fraudulent invoices, and intentional dissipation of marital assets." The judge flipped through the photos. Each page turn sounded like a gavel. She examined the image of Taryn feeding him sushi on our expensive sectional, then glanced at him with raised eyebrows. "Sir is Ms. Taryn, living in the home with you." "She stays over sometimes," he mumbled, "for security." "And does she pay rent?" "No." "Let me understand," the judge said, voice cold. "You are requesting that your wife pay the mortgage for a home in which you reside with your companion, who is also implicated in a fraud case involving that same property." His lawyer tried to speak, but the judge held up a finger. Motion for temporary support denied. My husband wilted like a deflated tent, but the judge wasn't finished. Motion to list the marital home for sale granted. Proceeds to be held in escrow pending resolution of the fraud claims. I felt a sharp, precise satisfaction. Not joy, but justice. Justice with steel edges. After the ruling, the real estate agent scheduled a walkthrough to photograph the property for listing. That evening, the agent called me, her voice tight with confusion and barely concealed disgust. "Ms. Camerata, the house is in an alarming condition. Construction zone," I guessed. "Not construction," she said firmly. "Damage. Intentional damage." A cold sensation crept beneath my ribs. What kind of damage? There are holes in the drywall that aren't part of any renovation plan, trash piles in every corner, a strong odor of smoke, and... She hesitated. The kitchen cabinets appear to have been ripped out. "Ripped out," I repeated slowly. "Gone. Removed. Wires exposed. It looks like someone tried to take the fixtures." I drove there immediately, despite my lawyer warning me to stay away. But I didn't enter the house. I sat across the street, engine running, heart pounding. And that's when I saw it. Taryn's truck backed up to the garage door, piled high with boxes, plywood cabinet doors, and fixtures. My fixtures. She was stealing the materials she claimed to have installed, trying to salvage whatever she could before the lawsuit swallowed her whole. My husband emerged from the garage holding a toolbox, shouting something I couldn't hear, gesturing frantically as if losing the stolen materials physically pained him. Taryn was barking orders back at him, irritated, panicked. I called the police before I even realized I'd dialed. This time they didn't ask me to leave. This is theft, I told them, handing over the court order for the home sale. The materials were purchased with marital funds. She's removing fixtures. That's illegal. The officers confronted them immediately. Taryn protested. My husband shouted. Both pointed fingers. But neither had documentation. Neither had a single legal leg to stand on. The police ordered them to unload every stolen item. On the lawn. In the rain. My husband glared at me like I'd stabbed him. Taryn snapped at him to stop making it worse, and the look he threw her was equal parts betrayal and desperation, the beginning of cracks forming in whatever illusion they'd built together. He yelled across the lawn at me, "You're ruining our lives." But all I felt was distance. A widening gulf between who he used to be and who he had become the moment he chose deceit over honesty, collusion over partnership. As their stolen cabinets soaked in the rain, I realized something profound. They weren't building a life without me. They were dismantling one, piece by piece, and now it was collapsing on top of them. The rain didn't stop for hours. It fell in relentless sheets, washing mud across the lawn where Taryn and my husband had been forced to unload every stolen cabinet countertop and fixture. Watching them, two people who once felt untouchable reduced to scrambling around in the mud, shouting at officers and at each other, was surreal. Not satisfying, not joyful, just clarifying. Because there are two kinds of collapse, the explosive cinematic kind and the slow grinding kind that comes from structural failure. What I witnessed that afternoon was both. The house was disintegrating physically, their partnership emotionally, and their entire scheme legally. When the last wooden panel hit the soaked grass, Taryn threw her hands up in exasperation. "This is ridiculous," she snapped at the officers. "I bought these materials." With whose money, the officer asked, unimpressed. She didn't answer. My husband tried instead, his voice cracking as he shifted wildly between defensiveness and pleading. "She did the work. I approved the budget." "One problem," the officer replied. "These items are fixtures of the home. Removing them violates the court-ordered sale. You two almost walked yourselves into a felony." My husband deflated. Taryn stared at him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time, and she did not like what she saw. Their alliance, once united by secrecy lust and the thrill of deception, fractured under the weight of reality. As the officers finished their report, my husband marched toward me, soaked, furious eyes burning like he wanted a target for his misery. "You're disgusting," he spat. "Petty. Cruel. You're destroying my life because you're bitter. I found someone else who actually appreciates me." The projection was almost theatrical. I rolled down my window calmly. "I'm not destroying your life," I said. "You're just finally living without mine." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The sentence landing heavier than I expected. Taryn stepped beside him. Shivering arms crossed tightly around herself. Her eyes darted between us, suspicion and disdain overlapping. Then she muttered, not quietly enough, "You didn't tell me she was like this." My husband snapped instantly. "Shut up, Taryn. You're not helping." The way he said it, sharp, dismissive, irritated, hit her like a slap. She stared at him, jaw tightening, while rainwater streaked down her face. For once, she didn't look defiant. She looked humiliated. The officer interrupted before their argument could escalate. "Sir, we're also citing your vehicle for expired registration. If you can't resolve it today, the truck may be impounded." My husband swore loudly, then glared at Taryn like she was personally responsible for the expiration date on his license plate. She threw her hands up in disbelief. "Don't look at me. I'm not your secretary." Their partnership, which they'd probably romanticized as adventurous and passionate, was unraveling in real time. Without secrecy, they had nothing. Without stolen money, they had no stability. Without the house they tried to claim, they had no place to hide. And without each other's illusions, they had no chemistry left. Taryn muttered something about needing to figure out her own situation before storming off to her truck. My husband chased after her, yelling, slipping in the mud, losing any shred of dignity he'd clung to. She kept walking. He begged. She didn't stop. Eventually, her truck sputtered to life, barely, and she drove off, leaving him standing alone in the downpour, drenched, breathless, and looking more abandoned than he ever accused me of leaving him. He turned toward me, slowly, expression contorted. "She'll be back," he said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. She just needs space. We're going through a stressful time. You caused this." I didn't respond. There was nothing left in me that needed to argue with him. An officer approached my window. "Ms. Camerata, we've documented everything. The property is secure. You're free to go." I nodded, thanked him, and drove away. In the rear-view mirror, my husband shrank smaller and smaller. Under the storm, a man who had gambled everything, our home, our finances, our marriage, on a fantasy that evaporated the moment consequences arrived. Over the next week, the fallout intensified. The listing agent emailed daily updates about the house, each one worse than the last. The property value plummeted. The damage was severe. Walls gouged out, cabinets destroyed, burn marks on the subfloor. The place looked less like a renovation project and more like the aftermath of a hurricane that someone gave permission to walk around with a sledgehammer. Every report made it more obvious they hadn't just lived recklessly, they had treated the house like a temporary hideout, something disposable, a place to use until everything collapsed. Meanwhile, my lawyer prepared for the next hearing with the kind of focus that made me grateful he was on my side. His voice was steady whenever he called. "Everything they've done strengthens your position. Every mistake they make becomes part of the record." But the emotional part, the part I didn't talk about, was stranger. I didn't feel triumphant. Not really. What I felt was distance, as if the woman who once lived in that house cooked dinner in that kitchen, folded laundry on that sectional, and trusted her husband implicitly had drifted far away. A ghost whose life I could describe but no longer inhabit. The collapse wasn't just his and Taryn's. It was the collapse of who I used to be. And with each day, each email from the agent, each legal update, each moment, watching the consequences roll toward them, I felt myself changing quietly, decisively. I wasn't reclaiming the life I had. I was building the life I should have built from the beginning. One without illusions. One without excuses. One that wasn't built on the hollow promise that loyalty alone could hold a marriage together. The collapse was necessary, because only ruins can be cleared. Only cleared ground can hold something stronger. The last text he ever sent me that month came late at night, unsteady, short, and desperate. "Husband, I can't believe you're doing this to me." I stared at the screen for a long moment and then finally typed the truth. "I'm not doing anything to you. I just stopped saving you." And for the first time, he had no reply. 6 months. That's how long it took for the dust to finally settle, not just in the legal sense, but inside me. 6 months to reclaim my breathing. 6 months for my heart to stop bracing every time my phone buzzed. 6 months for my life to tilt back into something resembling balance, even if the shape of it was completely different from what I once imagined. The divorce was finalized last week. It wasn't a fairy tale courtroom victory where the judge bangs the gavel and fireworks explode in the background. The legal system prefers balance, not poetic justice. But considering everything my husband and Taryn had done, what I walked away with was as close to justice as reality allows. The house, our supposed dream home, sold at a loss. A staggering one. $40,000 evaporated in the aftermath of destruction, theft, and unpermitted chaos. Under normal circumstances, that debt would have been split evenly. But the forensic accountant, my quiet savior, had documented the fraud so meticulously that the judge ruled the financial damage was caused by my husband and his co-conspirator. So the remaining equity, meager as it was, went entirely to me. And the loss. The judge deducted my husband's share from what would have been his portion of our retirement accounts. His half simply vanished. A consequence buried neatly inside numbers on a page, silent, devastating, irreversible. Taryn didn't bother showing up to the civil hearing for the fraud and breach of contract claims. The court issued a default judgment, $28,000 owed to me. Collecting it should have been impossible. Contractors like her rarely have clean assets, but she had one thing working against her, a surety bond tied to her license. My lawyer went after it like a wolf tracking blood. The bond company paid out. After months of paperwork, I received a check for $12,000. Not enough to erase what she'd done, but enough to sting her future. Her license now carries a permanent mark. She can work again, but that blemish will follow her every time she bids on a job. A quiet warning to anyone who looks closely, this one cuts corners. This one betrays trust. Somewhere out there, she is rebuilding her life under the weight of that mark. And I'm fine with that. As for my ex-husband, he didn't fare much better. 2 weeks after the cabinet in the rain incident, Taryn left him. Apparently, the romance dried up the moment he could no longer offer a free house and stolen renovation funds. She returned to her own problems. He was left standing in the ruins he created. He moved in with his parents, the same parents who once screamed at me over voicemail, insisting I had abandoned him. I won't pretend the news soothed anything inside me, but I did recognize the symmetry. He had always needed someone to clean up after him. When I stopped, he simply crawled back to the people who taught him that consequences could be negotiated away. But they couldn't negotiate this one. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that his father was furious. Humiliation had eaten through the family's pride, leaving resentment behind. His mother still insists I overreacted because some people truly believe that loyalty means absorbing endless injury without complaint. Her daughter-in-law was never going to be that person. He attempted contact exactly once. A long email, no subject line, full of soft rewrites of the past. I was confused. She manipulated me. I wasn't myself. I miss our life. I miss the version of us that had potential. Can we meet for coffee? I didn't reply. I forwarded it to my lawyer, who sent a standard cease contact notice. It wasn't anger that guided me. It was indifference. A clean, quiet disconnect that felt healthier than rage ever could. He is a stranger now, one who merely happens to know my middle name and my social security number. Life on my side of the wreckage is simpler. My apartment is small. Nearly everything I own fits into a few IKEA pieces. But there's something liberating about living in a place with no memories embedded in the walls, no sawdust, no arguments about budgets, no laughter that meant something different than I thought. On Saturday, I woke up at 9 in the morning, not because someone slammed a cabinet or a contractor showed up early, but because my body finally decided it was rested. I brewed coffee, slowly savoring the smell. I stepped onto my balcony, tiny metal railed, shaded by old brick, and realized I hadn't felt a panic spike in months. Behind me, my phone buzzed with a message from one of the few friends who stayed loyal through everything. "Freedom dinner tonight," she wrote. I smiled. We didn't go anywhere fancy. Just a dive bar with sticky floors and a jukebox that ate dollar bills. We played pool. We talked about nothing. It felt like reclaiming oxygen. At one point, my friend leaned across the table and asked, "Do you regret how fast you moved? Calling the lawyer before you even opened the door?" I thought about it carefully, not about the events themselves, but about the alternative. If I'd confronted them, my husband would have cried, redirected, lied. Taryn would have inserted herself into every argument. They would have twisted the narrative, siphoned more money, dragged out the collapse, prolonged my suffering. I would have been fighting two people armed with secrecy, manipulation, and a head start. Instead, I took a photo. I let the law carry the weight. I stepped out of the chaos instead of into it. No, I told my friend, it was the smartest thing I ever did. Because some people want a screaming match they can twist into victimhood. Some people want chaos they can win through performance. Some people want a battlefield where tears can be weaponized. What I gave them was a spreadsheet. And no one cries their way out of a spreadsheet. These days, I'm not climbing mountains or reinventing myself with dramatic flair. I'm not dating someone new. I'm not pretending this was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm just a woman eating a pepperoni pizza on a Tuesday, watching Netflix without headphones, sitting in a quiet apartment where nothing is rotting in the fridge because the power bill is my